would be his niece. Your name, child?
Sarah?
I am Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder. Men sometimes have strange motives for the things they do.
I know.
Vincent Price fell off a horse on day one, and the 24-year-old director refused to check on him, hoping the anger would fuel his performance. 9 months after release, that director was found dead at 25. The composer paid the orchestra from his own savings, then died by suicide after battling brain disease for 27 years. Price's 10-page apology letter, it arrived after the director's body was discovered. Witchfinder General was made as a tax write-off nobody expected to succeed, but the real horror wasn't on screen, it was behind the camera. This is the story of how a cursed production destroyed everyone who touched it. Fact 1. Picture this. Day 1 of filming. Vincent Price, 57-year-old horror legend with 84 films under his belt, climbs onto a horse for a countryside riding scene, The Horsebucks. Price hits the ground hard, and his 24-year-old director, Michael Reeves, he refuses to even check on him. Not because he was too busy, but because he wanted Price angry. Reeves had been forced by American financiers to cast Price when he really wanted Donald Pleasance for the role. So when Price got hurt, Reeves saw an opportunity. Let the star stew in his resentment. Let him feel unwanted. Maybe then he'd deliver the dark, menacing performance Reeves actually needed instead of the campy horror Price was famous for. It was calculated psychological warfare from minute one, and it set the tone for the most toxic set in British film history. Fact 2. Michael Reeves had a vision for Witchfinder General, and that vision did not include gratuitous nudity. But producer Tony Tenser had a different priority, the German export market. So Tenser ordered additional scenes filmed in a tavern setting, featuring topless local women, specifically for overseas distribution. Reeves refused to direct them, so Tenser grabbed the crew after Reeves wrapped for the day and shot the scenes himself. The credits cheekily list these as additional scenes by Lewis M. Hayward, which actor Ian Ogilvy later explained was Reeves' bitter inside joke. To Reeves, additional scenes meant some prick of a producer putting his oar in and messing up what the director had done. Different actresses played the clothed and nude versions, and the export cut contained violence and nudity that Reeves never approved. His film was being hijacked in real time. Fact 3. Michael Reeves didn't just research the real Matthew Hopkins, England's most notorious witch hunter. He took his cast and crew to the exact locations where Hopkins conducted his trials and executions. The medieval market towns of Kersey and Lavenham in Suffolk, where the hanging and burning scenes were filmed, were actual sites of 17th century witch hunts. Orford Castle, standing imposingly on the Suffolk coast, provided the backdrop for the film's blood-soaked finale. These weren't just atmospheric locations. They were places where real people were tortured and killed based on superstition and fear. That documentary-like authenticity seeps into every frame. You're not watching a horror movie. You're watching a historical reenactment in the places where the history actually happened, and that makes it infinitely more disturbing. Fact 4. British law required all film scripts to be submitted to the British Board of Film Censors before production. So in August, they sent over the completed first draft. The examiner who read it was appalled. They called producer Tony Tenser an ape and described the screenplay as perfectly beastly and ghoulish. The detailed report that followed was even worse. The script was labeled a study in sadism in which every detail of cruelty and suffering is lovingly dwelt on. They weren't wrong. But here's the thing. That visceral, unflinching approach to historical brutality is exactly what made the film a masterpiece. The censors saw sadism, Reeves saw truth, and that clash would spark a censorship battle that lasted 33 years. Fact 5. When Witchfinder General premiered in 1968, it didn't fit neatly into any existing horror category. It wasn't gothic horror like Hammer Films. It wasn't slasher or monster movie. It was something else entirely. Historical brutality set in rural England, grounded in realistic human evil rather than supernatural threats. Decades later, scholars realized what Reeves had created: folk horror, a subgenre defined by rural settings, historical contexts, pagan undertones, and human cruelty that feels more disturbing than any monster. That subgenre would include later classics like The Blood on Satan's Claw and The Wicker Man. It influenced everything from The Devils to modern films like Midsummer. Witchfinder General became the foundation a tax write-off directed by a depressed 24-year-old accidentally invented an entire category of horror that would influence filmmakers for the next 50 years. That's legacy.
She was innocent.
God forgive you, Matthew Hopkins.
Fact 6. The British censors demanded cuts. Lots of them. The knife torture scenes, cut. The cellar beating of a woman by Stern, cut. The ducking scene, cut. A woman burning alive, cut. The axe blows in the climactic castle cellar fight, cut. The infamous heel in the eye sequence, gone. Nearly 2 full minutes of the film's most brutal violence disappeared before UK audiences ever saw it, and those cuts remained in place for nearly 3 decades. VHS releases in the 80s and early 90s still had the censored version. It wasn't until 1995, 27 years after release, that the complete uncut version was finally approved and released on the Redemption video label. In 2001, the BBFC passed it fully uncut, but for a generation of British horror fans, they only knew the sanitized version. The real Witchfinder General was hidden from them for decades. Fact 7. During rehearsals, Reeves kept telling Price to tone it down. Stop rolling your eyes. Stop the theatrical flourishes. Play it straight serious. Menacing Price finally snapped. He turned to this kid director and said, "Young man, I have made 84 movies. What have you done?" The entire crew held their breath, and Michael Reeves, without missing a beat, fired back. 2 good ones. The silence that followed was deafening. A 24-year-old had just told a horror icon that 82 of his 84 films were garbage. And you know what? Price couldn't argue, because Reeves was right. This cocky kid knew exactly what he wanted, and Price's usual shtick wasn't going to cut it. That exchange broke something in Price. He stopped fighting and started listening. Fact 8. Here's how fragile filmmaking really is. The original ending called for Vincent Price's character to be thrown into a vat of flaming coals. They had the set built, they had the stunt planned, but then someone checked Price's contract. He was booked to start rehearsals for a Broadway musical called Darling of the Day, and there wasn't enough time to film the elaborate death scene Panic. Reeves grabbed actor Nicky Henson and improvised on the spot. "All right, just shoot Vincent and I'll get Ian to scream and shout and go mad and freeze frame on Hilary Dwyer screaming." That hasty, desperate solution became one of the most nihilistic, soul-crushing endings in horror history. The hero goes insane. His lover screams. Freeze frame roll credits. No catharsis, no justice, just madness and trauma. All because of a Broadway schedule conflict.
You took her from me! You took her from me!
Fact 9. Paul Ferris was hired to score Witchfinder General, and when he showed producer Tony Tenser his ambitious plans for a 55-piece orchestra, Tenser laughed in his face. There was no money for that, so Ferris did something insane. He paid most of the musicians out of his own pocket. He conducted a full orchestra at Olympic Studios in February 1968, bleeding his personal savings dry because he believed in the film that much. And then, get this, he put on period costume and appeared in the movie itself under the fake name Maurice Jarre, a reference to his favorite composer, Maurice Jarre. He plays a distraught husband whose wife gets burned by Hopkins. Tenser eventually reimbursed him after hearing the final score and realizing it was a masterpiece. But imagine the audacity. The composer literally paid to work on the film, then watched his on-screen character seek revenge for the horrors he was helping to create.
Elizabeth! Elizabeth! Oh, God.
Fact 10. When Vincent Price finally met Michael Reeves face-to-face on location, the young director didn't shake his hand or welcome him to the production. Instead, Reeves looked Price dead in the eye and said, "I didn't want you, and I still don't want you, but I'm stuck with you." Multiple cast members witnessed this nuclear confrontation Price had already heard through the grapevine that Reeves was complaining about his casting before he'd even left America. The fact that Reeves refused to meet him at Heathrow Airport was the first insult. But this was open warfare. A rookie director with only 2 films to his name was publicly humiliating one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, and the worst part? Reeves meant every word. Fact 11. Here's something wild. When censor John Trevelyan watched the rough cut, he thought it was acceptable. Violent, sure, but manageable. Then Paul Ferris added his orchestral score. Suddenly, Trevelyan was threatening to withhold the film entirely. What happened? The music transformed acceptable violence into unbearable horror. Ferris had composed this lush, romantic, almost fairy tale score that created a sickening counterpoint to the brutality on screen. Beautiful music over torture scenes messes with your brain. It makes the violence feel more real, more disturbing, more wrong. The disconnect between what you're hearing and what you're seeing amplifies the horror tenfold. Ferris's score was so effective at heightening the film's impact that the censor nearly banned the whole thing. The film was released with cuts, but the damage was done. The music had made it too powerful to ignore. Fact 12. American International Pictures distributed Witchfinder General in the US, but they had a problem. How do you market a British witch hunter film to American audiences? Their solution was to completely rebrand it. They retitled it The Conqueror Worm to make it seem like part of their successful Edgar Allan Poe series, directed by Roger Corman and starring Vincent Price. There was just one problem. The film has absolutely nothing to do with Poe's poem, so they recorded Vincent Price reading The Conqueror Worm and slapped it on as bookend narration at the beginning and end. Suddenly, Michael Reeves' historical horror film was being marketed as Gothic Poe adaptation. It was a complete lie, but it worked. American audiences showed up expecting another Corman/Price/Poe collaboration and got something far darker and more disturbing instead. Fact 13. While Michael Reeves was directing one of Britain's darkest horror films, he was fighting his own private war. He suffered from severe depression and crippling insomnia. He was taking sleeping pills and undergoing various treatments just to function. Cast members noticed his intensity, his obsessive vision, the way he threw himself completely into the work. Looking back, they realized they were watching someone channel their mental illness into art. Reeves was 24 years old and creating a masterpiece about human cruelty while battling demons most people twice his age couldn't handle. The darkness in Witchfinder General wasn't just research and vision, it was personal. And that made it more authentic and more disturbing than any exploitation film had the right to be. Fact 14. On the morning of February 11th, 1969, Michael Reeves' cleaning lady found him dead in his bedroom in Knightsbridge. He was 25 years old. The coroner ruled it an accidental barbiturate overdose. The dosage was too marginal to suggest suicide, but many suspected otherwise. Reeves had been struggling with depression. He'd been taking sleeping pills for months. Whether accidental or intentional, the result was the same. British horror lost its brightest talent just as his career was taking off. Witchfinder General had been released only 9 months earlier. Reeves never got to see it become a cult classic, never got to direct his next planned film, The Oblong Box, never got to fulfill the massive potential everyone saw in him. Film critic Jay Hoberman later noted that the film's cult status was partly due to the tragic death of its director. Reeves became a legend precisely because we'll never know what else he could have created. Fact 15. After Vincent Price finally saw the completed film in 1969, something shifted in him. He realized Reeves had been right all along. The young director's harsh methods, his refusal to let Price lean on his usual tricks, his brutal honesty. It had all been in service of getting the best performance of Price's career. So Price sat down and wrote a 10-page letter to Michael Reeves. He praised the film. He acknowledged that he finally understood what Reeves had been after. He apologized for their conflicts and thanked him for pushing him to be better. It was a beautiful, heartfelt reconciliation from a legendary actor to the young director he'd fought with so bitterly. But the letter arrived after Reeves was already dead. The reconciliation that could have healed their relationship never happened. Price carried that regret for years, and in interviews would always mention that Reeves gave him one of his best roles, even if their relationship had been toxic. Fact 16. Paul Ferris, the composer who paid musicians out of his own pocket and appeared in the film as a torture victim, suffered for decades after Witchfinder General. He was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, a degenerative neurological disorder that slowly destroys your brain and motor functions. For 27 years, Ferris battled the disease as it progressively robbed him of his abilities. In 1995, at age 54, he ended his own life. The man who created one of horror's most haunting and beautiful scores, the score that made the British censor threaten to ban the entire film, died by suicide after nearly 3 decades of watching his mind deteriorate, and his masterpiece score? It wasn't even properly available in the US until 12 years after his death, when the 2007 DVD finally restored the original music. Ferris never got to see his work fully appreciated. Fact 17. Vincent Price spent most of the production convinced he was being tortured by an arrogant kid director who didn't respect him. The clashes were constant. Price was used to directors who let him do his thing. Reeves kept reining him in, demanding less performance and more reality. It drove Price crazy, but after seeing the final film, Price had to admit something that probably hurt his ego. Reeves was right. Price later said, "Reeves hated me. He didn't want me at all for the part. I didn't like him either." But then added, "It was one of the best performances I've ever given." That admission is enormous. A 57-year-old horror legend with 84 films acknowledging that a 24-year-old rookie director got more out of him than most of his career collaborators, Price was forced to abandon his trademark camp style and play Hopkins as a real, menacing human monster, and it revitalized his entire approach to horror after Witchfinder General. Price took his craft more seriously. Fact 18. Lead actor Ian Ogilvy wasn't just hired for Witchfinder General. He was Michael Reeves' best friend. They'd met when they were 15 years old and immediately started making amateur films together. Ogilvy appeared in Reeves' early shorts and in all 3 of his feature films. As Ogilvy later said, Michael always felt comfortable with people he knew. He liked to have a repertory of people that he used all the time, and I was the main one. I was his leading man. That friendship shows on screen. Ogilvy understood Reeves' vision instinctively. He knew what the director wanted without extensive explanation. And when Reeves died at 25, Ogilvy didn't just lose a collaborator. He lost his closest friend and the person who had given him his best roles. The grief devastated him. Ogilvy eventually moved to the US and continued his acting career, but he never worked with another director who understood him the way Reeves did. Fact 19. Here's the ultimate irony. Witchfinder General was never supposed to matter. American International Pictures made it as a tax write-off. They were producing cheap exploitation films for accounting purposes and didn't expect anything of quality. The budget was under £100,000. The director was an unknown 24-year-old. The script was about witch hunting. Nobody at AIP thought this would be anything more than disposable genre filler. They were creating art by accident. And that accident became one of the most influential British horror films ever made. It's been called the 15th greatest horror film of all time. It invented the folk horror genre. It influenced filmmakers for decades, all because a studio threw money at a project they expected to fail and got a genius director who refused to make garbage just because nobody was watching. Fact 20. Witchfinder General was a surprise success, especially in America where it grossed over $10 million. American International Pictures immediately offered Michael Reeves his next project, directing their next Edgar Allan Poe adaptation, The Oblong Box. Reeves was being hailed as Britain's next great horror director. At 25, he was about to break into the big leagues. He'd proven himself with a tiny budget and a hostile star. What could he do with real resources and studio support? We'll never know. Reeves died from a barbiturate overdose during pre-production. The Oblong Box was eventually made, but not by him. It's one of cinema's great tragedies. A brilliant young filmmaker cut down just as his career was taking off. What other masterpieces would he have created? What would British horror look like if Reeves had lived? Those questions haunt film historians to this day. So next time you watch Witchfinder General, remember what it cost. A director dead at 25 before seeing his masterpiece become a classic. A composer who bled his savings dry, then suffered 27 years with degenerative disease before ending his life. A horror legend writing a reconciliation letter that arrived too late. A tax write-off that accidentally invented an entire genre. The real horror isn't the torture scenes or nihilistic ending. It's knowing everyone who created it suffered for it. Every frame is haunted by real tragedy. You can feel it. This wasn't just entertainment. This was people bleeding onto film. You'll never see this movie the same way again.